Hey guys, Dominik here. In this video I want to talk about how I got fluent in Japanese. I hope this will give you an insight into which books are useful, which apps to use, and in general which methods work very well. I will talk about all the different stages from being an absolute beginner, becoming more and more fluent, and what comes afterwards. Okay, let me get my books. First, I would like to explain what I mean by being fluent in Japanese, because for different people it might mean different things. I've been studying Japanese for around 6 years, some of it in my home country Germany and some of it here in Japan. About certificates, I have done the so-called JLPT a few times, which is the most common test for Japanese language proficiency. It is kind of like the TOEIC or TOEFL for English, but instead of having score points you have 5 different levels, and 5 being the lowest and N1 being the highest. I passed the JLPT N2 after around 2 years, and then 1 year later I passed N1, so after 3 years. After that I moved to Japan to go to university here, and I also did a couple of internships. Japanese has become an integral part not only of my daily life, but also my career as well. So I think I can give you a special perspective to the whole Japanese learning process. Alright, now that the credentials are out of the way, let's start. I began learning Japanese when I was 23. At that time I pretty much knew nothing about Japanese. Couldn't write a single Japanese character, and probably the only words I knew were konnichiwa, arigato, and sayonara. I mean, yes, I watched quite a lot of anime before that, but let's be honest here, you cannot learn Japanese by just watching anime with English subtitles. Also at university I was majoring in engineering, so it had nothing to do with Japanese language. Anyways, when I started from zero, the first thing I did was learning Hiragana and Katakana. I highly recommend you doing this first as well. For those who don't know, the Japanese language has 3 writing systems: Hiragana, Katakana, and Kanji. Hiragana and Katakana are phonetic lettering systems, which means each character represents 1 syllable in Japanese. So for example, Aioeo, Kakiko-keko, each character represents 1 sound or 1 syllable. In total there are 46 characters each for Hiragana and Katakana. You can kind of think of them as the Japanese alphabet. On the other hand, you have kanji, which are Chinese characters that have been slightly changed for Japanese. They make reading Japanese so difficult because to read an average newspaper you have to remember around 3000 kanji. But in this video I will not go into detail about kanji too much. Anyways, learning Hiragana and Katakana will help you throughout your whole language learning process, and it doesn't even take that much time to learn. I used an app to learn Hiragana and Katakana, but unfortunately it doesn't exist anymore. But I think any app with high ratings should be fine. I have heard a lot of good things about the app called Obenkyou, which I will link down in the description. After learning Hiragana and Katakana, I went to a Japanese language school in Germany for around 2 hours each week. They had some group lessons with 8 students and 1 teacher, but because we were so many people, I felt like the progress was really slow. Therefore, at the same time, I started self-studying using Genki 1 and Genki 2. These books are really popular, and I think there's a good reason for that. The explanations are very simple, there are a lot of exercises, and I think you can self-study it without any problems, so I highly recommend it. Additionally, I've watched a lot of Japanese anime and Netflix and tried to just immerse myself in the language as much as possible. After 6 months, I decided to go to Japan for the first time, and I did a 1-month homestay in the city called Kanazawa, which is in the northwest of Japan. At that time, I was maybe N5 level, which means I had a lot of trouble understanding even the most simple sentences from my host mom. But in that 1 month I had so much fun exploring Japan and studying Japanese at the language school, so I can highly recommend you to do a homestay at a Japanese family. When I came back to Germany, I felt like I had improved a lot, and I continued self-studying Genki 2 until I finished it. After 1 year I was around N4 level, which means I could understand basic Japanese such as daily conversations or talking about your interests and hobbies. So I would say I cleared the beginner stage in around 1 year. At the start of the 2nd year, I still went to the Japanese language school in Germany quite some times, but I felt more and more that it's kind of inefficient and self-studying is better. Here I did a change which probably had the biggest impact on my whole language learning journey, which is starting to use an app called Anki. For those who don't know, Anki is basically flashcards on crack. It is optimized in a way that any vocabulary you put into the app you will basically never forget. So if you just learn 10 new words every day, this means you will learn over 3500 words words every year. It is really powerful and probably the most efficient way to learn vocabulary. Also, I started listening to Japanese podcasts and did language exchange with Japanese living in Germany. I started applying for internships and scholarships in Japan, and after half a year I could do an exchange semester in Tokyo. Compared to my previous time in Japan, I was able to speak Japanese more confidently, and I could also build more deeper friendships with Japanese. At that point, I had never done a Japanese language test before, so I was thinking whether I should take the JLPT N3 or N2. My level was probably around N3, but I felt like if I got lucky and studied a lot, I could maybe pass N2. For preparation, I mainly used a book series called Nihongo Sou Matome for N2. This one is the book for N1, but it's basically the same style, and they have vocabulary books, reading, listening comprehension, and also grammar. I also tried other JLPT preparation books, but this series I enjoyed by far the most. I think even if you don't take the JLPT, this book is really good as an addition for your study or to self-study. I think in general, signing up for the JLPT can be a nice motivator no matter which level you are, so I highly recommend you signing up for the test. Well, anyways, I took the JLPT N2 at the end of my second year and surprisingly passed it. Now with the N2 done, I came back to Germany and considered the intermediate stage as finished. At this point, I stopped going to group lessons altogether. On one hand, I loved meeting people who are also interested in Japan and studying Japanese. On the other hand, I was now at the level where I could enjoy watching Japanese content without any subtitles. Also, I wanted to just study based on my personal interests. I was still doing flashcards with Anki almost every day, but I have to say after I passed N2, my motivation dropped quite a lot and I felt a bit burnt out. I also had to focus on finishing my master's degree, so I had other priorities for a while. During that year, I went to Japan to do a 3-month internship, and on the job I was learning a lot of Japanese, but in my free time I wasn't really studying anymore. I still signed up for the JLPT N1, which is the hardest test, and I hope that if I just study a lot in the last month, I will somehow pass it. Spoiler alert, I didn't. The difficulty gap between N1 and N2 is huge, but after I failed, at least my motivation went up again, and I wanted to finish this last test. So I did all the Nihongo Sou Matome, this one, again, and I also did a lot of mock-up tests, and I did a lot of Anki again. Additionally, I watched a lot of Japanese Netflix and YouTube. After another 6 months, I took the N1 again, and finally I passed. And afterwards, I got a scholarship to do my PhD here in Japan. So I moved to Japan 2.5 years ago and been staying here since before the pandemic. I've not been actively studying Japanese in the last 2 years, but of course I'm exposed to Japanese a lot and I speak it every single day. But there is still a lot of things about Japanese I struggle with. For one, it's kanji, probably pitch accent, and also vocabulary. You only improve those things if you keep actively studying. They don't just come magically to you if you live in Japan, even if you're at a high level already. But yeah, that's it. Hope I could give you an overview of which materials to use at different stages of your learning process. I will make more videos explaining some of these methods in detail, so if you're interested, please subscribe and leave me a comment about what part of the language learning journey is really hard for you. Thank you guys for watching and see you in the next one.